welcome everyone to the Priestess Mercury podcast on February 2nd, 2021. It is in bulk today, which is the Earth Sabbath, the Earth Day of the pregnancy, the metaphorical pregnancy, when we can first notice spring deep within as a seed, new beginnings. It's a great time to set intentions. It's kind of like the true new year, really, in a way. Good time to set intentions. It's Groundhog. I don't know if it's actually Groundhog Day, but they're around the same time. And I am lighting Palo Santo for our invocation to start on this in bulk, heavy Aquarius time. So I'm calling upon the north, the east, the south, the west, earth, air, fire, and water, all of the planets in our galaxy, bringing forth the Aquarian energy, bringing forth all of our higher selves, angels, ancestors, allies, bringing forth the Priestess Mercury vibe to channel through Matt and I for this hour. May we be grounded with open hearts, awake souls, and innovating minds. So mote it be.
So mote it be. And, we're going to jump right into what's going on. Right now, there is a lot going on in the sign of Aquarius. And so today we're going to unpack a bit more about the archetype of Aquarius and kind of what all of this means. So, if you're following along, it's helpful to take a look at your chart to see what's in not only Aquarius, but what do you have in any of the fixed signs? So Aquarius, Taurus, Leo, and Scorpio, because those are all going to be heavily impacted by what's happening now. It's also, the kids born during this period are going to have a loaded, what we would call a stellium of planets in Aquarius, and a very powerful one too, because it's all of the inner planets. And here we're talking about the visible ones. So except for Mars, are all there in Aquarius, and most of them are squaring Mars. So everything is connected right now, and it's a kind of a really kind of important time. So we want to kind of dig in a little bit and touch base with Aquarius. Aquarius is an air sign, as we've mentioned before. So it has a lot to do with mental properties, how we think, how we operate within the mind, how we communicate often comes through Aquarius, Gemini, Libra. There's a lot of shifting of boundaries that happen within air signs. Aquarius, in terms of the image of Aquarius in the Zodiac, it's one of the human signs. It is the water bearer. So we get this image of transmuting the energy of water and bringing it into the kind of earthen vessel of the cup and into the human body. And so there is this kind of in-betweenness about Aquarius that involves the transmutation of the emotions into the physical form.
And just stop you right there, because that's a really loaded sentence.
Yeah.
The transmutation of emotion into human form. What the hell? What's that? And Aquarius is super complicated. And again, going back through what you shared, we have the Gemini, Libra, Aquarius as the three air signs, which it's kind of like Gemini is the lower mind, the right here, right now, five senses mind. The Libra is this diplomat mind, seeing all sides, both perspectives, bringing diplomacy and fairness, juggling duality in the mind. And then Aquarius being this higher mind that comes from the stars, that comes from out there, right? It's like Aquarius is out here. So when, out here, and then when you say transmuting emotion through the body, isn't it kind of feels like the thoughts transmute emotion through the body?
Yeah, there's a negotiation between the mental part of the body and the thinking process and the emotional process, and there's an interaction and a translation that is happening that helps us to connect with and engage with, and in some ways
I want to unpack that too, because that's such a conceptual sentence that's like, what the hell does that mean? So like if transmutation is turning one thing into another, right? Is it transmutation when you turn like ice into vapor? Is that transmutation, or like water and ice? Is that?
Yeah, transmutation, transformation, they're very similar type of concepts.
But is transformation a little bit more one thing completely into another thing?
Right. It changes all of its properties, but it's still the same essence.
I thought that was transmutation, where transformation is one thing turning into another completely. Like shit into gold, alchemy, right? You're taking poop, right, and you're turning it into a piece of gold would be transformation. But transmutation, I could be totally off about this, is more like ice or water turning into steam or something like that.
Well, to mutate is to change the properties of it. But also when we're talking about changing form too, they're very similar types of actions.
We don't have to get, I'm in the minutia of it. So let's move on. So they're similar. So it's turning one form into another. And then, so if Aquarius in its archetypal essence is that transmuter.
Yes.
And it is, and it does feel to me like Aquarius, because so many people think Aquarius is a water sign because the water bearer is the symbol of it. And yet it's like something in between, right? It's like when as water becomes air or emotion turns to thought.
Yeah, I mean, it's a complex image because it's not, the stream is there, and you can think of that as like the Piscean stream, since Pisces is right next to Aquarius. And it's, changing the nature of the water and bringing it into the body.
Is in the image isn't drinking the water though. What is the?
No, it's scooping the water out of the stream with a cup.
Like a vessel. You're about to drink it.
But it speaks to the nature of both water and air, that you're able to, it flows into and becomes the shape of whatever it's in.
Right. That's what I was just thinking, like scooping it from the Piscean stream, which is that we're all one and it's all the collective and the oneness of it all into the individual. Like you're bringing it into your individual self. So it's your individual feelings and thoughts and unique blueprint of who you are that you then bring to the collective in service for the collective.
Right. Yeah. And it involves a bit of a process. So it's,
the process of transmutation that.
Yeah. And we can think of, contemporary ideas of technology, like how we change an idea from one medium to another.
Oh, that's great. That's a great example. Like the internet, how it's changed our thinking.
Yeah, that's one of the reasons why astrologers will associate Aquarius with both the internet and electricity, which, changes form and shape via the conduits that it goes through. So Aquarius is always about this in-betweenness between spaces, whereas Gemini is a polarity, and so is Libra to an extent. Like Aquarius is kind of the moving and the shifting of the thought process.
When you say that, I think of, and I just want to just disclaim real quick too, that I love thinking about Aquarius in this present moment as if it's a brand new thing. I think that's in service to Aquarius, and how used to concepts we get where you're just blathering it off. Oh, Scorpio, death and rebirth, Taurus. You can start to see these archetypes as just concepts. They're not just concepts where you rattle off these adjectives. They are living sentient forces of the living sentient universe. And I love right now, in service of the Aquarian sentience, of feeling and thinking into Aquarius as if it's for the first time. Right. And as you're talking about Aquarius being this in between, it feels to me like it's literally the electricity, that's going through the wire. It's literally the etheric net of the internet. And when I think of that inside of me or inside of a human, it almost feels like the aura or the etheric body, the subtle body. If we don't want to get Star Trek on this and have like these, again, minutia, and just more kind of see that we have like our gross body, our physical body, and then we have the subtle body that is the intermediary between the formless and form. And that this intermediary body, the subtle body, is constantly, like you're saying, translating and interpreting, taking the numinous, taking the formless, taking the abstract of that's really Pisces and beyond, and filtering it through into an individual idea, into and that's kind of feels to me like the humanitarian aspect. Like, has Aquarius really is about like everyone's equal, we all deserve freedom and sovereignty over our own lives. That's a thought feeling. That's like filtering through the numinous, the oneness of love, and going, we all deserve sovereignty over our own lives. It's like filtering through what cannot be named but just is, into a concept called liberty or freedom.
Right.
Which is such a key word of Aquarius, but it's not this intellectual version like Gemini would make it.
Right. It's figuring out, like, how does this lower mind connect with these, with the numinous, with the oneness of all of consciousness. And it's the interplay. That's why Aquarius is an activity as much as it is a being or a thing.
Yeah, it's a being that is constantly, I mean, we're all verbs. Everything alive is a verb, not a noun. Gemini turns it into a noun. Like the logical mind's like, I'm a person, that's a noun. But Aquarius is like, yeah, but really you're a verb, because nothing stays put. Everything's in constant motion.
Right. And Aquarius, comes after Capricorn. And so it reminds us that the structures are there to help the activity of this movement that has to happen, that we need the dynamic of life. Otherwise, those structures get stagnant and devoid of
toxic
life. Yeah.
Toxic patriarchy.
And we're kind of in that moment right now where a lot of the structures that we've relied on have grown very stagnant, have grown very rigid and not useful. I mean, we can think of the US government in particular has in the past 5 or 6 years has been talked about as being inert, unable to do anything. In fact, I think the word was "do nothing Congress" that went around for quite a while. And when our structures get to that kind of stuckness, then we get things get swampy. The emotions, like when you have a stream that gets cut off and just becomes isolated from the flow of the watershed or whatnot, like it gets overridden with algae and it gets murky. There's that
Yeah,
wonderful
totally. Stuck.
tarot card in the Thoth deck that Crowley and Frida Harris constructed. I think it's the Seven of Cups, where when you cut off yourself from the activity and the flow and get things trapped in the cups, then they get like everything gets toxic. And
So true that I mean, and I just want to make a commentary too, like outside of the government, the political, like I get that way with tarot and astrology. And I can get so stagnant when it all becomes the same thing over and over. This Fool card, Aquarius, the square, rattling off in this mental plane, these type of things, which is why I always, whenever I've taught tarot, it's always like, look at the image. With clients, it's always like, look at the image. It's alive right now. Don't just revert to the meaning, the intellectual meaning of it, the Geminian or the Libran meaning of it. Like, have that in your back pocket to pull from. But the aliveness is always alive, always changing, always moving with all of the archetypes, be it tarot, astrology. They all get channeled by a human being. That's what it was happened. A human being a long ass time ago channeled a system, and we're all capable of channeling that system. And then it can get, if it's not constantly progressing and evolving and changing and moving by us in the present being evolvers, changers, and progressors and innovators, then it gets swampy and stuck and stagnant and trapping. So like that's even just bringing more to life, that movement energy of Aquarius being the intermediary. And this I feel it right now entering me. Like I can feel the aliveness of Aquarius right now, innovating Aquarius through our talk.
Right. Yeah, I mean,
It innovates.
that's one of the key words for Aquarius is that innovation. It finds ways to get out of the stuckness, and so it's an interplay. And this is where I feel like a lot of interpretations of Aquarius can sometimes get stuck in that rote memorization. Where, and I know you've mentioned a few times on here, Michelle, about overplaying the group end of Aquarius, but it's not about the group or the individual. It's about the interplay of the group and the individual.
I feel so moved by the interplay right now.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah.
also what's starting to come alive as we're fleshing out the interplay of Aquarius, the electricity, the movement, is also Aquarius's ancient ruler of Saturn and modern ruler, which is a progression and innovation of that is Uranus, and how both of those energies play into Aquarius, that there's the Saturnian Aquarius and the Uranian Aquarius.
Right. Yeah. And that old Saturnian Aquarius is that point where we've come to the structures, we've come to society, and we have to figure out how to constructively use limitation on ourself and our self-expression to be able to join into the group patterns and everything. And then the Uranian element is kind of out of that Promethean myth of giving the fire of consciousness and the liberation to groups and to individuals as well. And so you get that they both complement each other.
I want to again interrupt and stop at the Promethean myth, because I love that image of Uranian Aquarius being the invention of fire.
Right.
And how that's such a wonderful metaphor, such a wonderful living symbol of the moment Aquarius as Uranus enters, because it is like that. It's all of the sun. Like all of a sudden there was some human there that just got the idea to rub sticks, right? Aquarius enters your brain. That's how Aquarius enters your brain. It enters your brain with a sudden idea, a sudden new difference, all of a sudden, like a lightning strike. And then innovation comes. And I love that innovation of fire. And then, psychologically, it could be suddenly you feel different about yourself or about relationships or your work or your spirituality. Like it's like getting a sudden upgrade, a sudden revamp. And that's the Uranus part.
Yeah, and as a poet and teacher of poets for years, one of the things that you learn is that, or you hear over and over again, I know I heard it from students quite a bit, is that, well, I just wasn't feeling inspired. And so there's that fire element, and they're like wanting the fire, but they're not engaging. They don't want to engage the mind at all. And so it gets, they're just waiting around for it. But fire needs air. If we think about the properties of fire, if you don't have any oxygen, the fire will die out and disappear. So we need the mind to engage in awareness in order for us to light that kind of
Raining
flame and
fire.
desire and all that kind of stuff.
When you say that, I think we need Saturnian Aquarius to ignite Uranian Aquarius. That Aquarius with Saturn as the ruler is the discipline of the mind. Where Saturn rules Capricorn is the discipline of the routine and the discipline of the body, the earth discipline. Saturn ruling Aquarius is the discipline of the mind, that if we're going to use the creative example, that even when you're not inspired, you're still sitting down and saying, I'm going to write for this hour every day. And when you create that mental discipline or a meditation practice, every day I'm going to meditate at this time. And when you set the mental discipline, it calls to the Uranian Aquarius. It opens you for that sudden inspiration, for the muse, essentially. Like Uranus is kind of the muse.
Right. It's when
can be.
When we engage the mind as an active thing, and try to, just sit there with it and let it do its thing a little bit. And that's where that discipline comes in, because we want it to do it without us. Sometimes we want to have that flash in the pan.
We want it all easy breezy without Saturn ever having to touch our lips or hands. But we need Saturn. It doesn't happen. It's almost like that reminds me of that phrase, you got to meet the universe halfway. The discipline calls to the magic.
Right. And I've gotten this question a lot from people about astrology in particular, and they're always like, why does it work? Or why should it work? And I know it irritates people when I come back and I'm like, you have to activate it. It doesn't make logical sense.
Right. It's not in the realm of logic. It's not in the Gemini realm.
Right.
It is something that is beyond logic.
Yeah, because if you keep it in that like Gemini realm where it's a classification system, what you get is, and I see it a lot on Twitter in particular these days, and Instagram too, where people start stereotyping each other using their sun signs. And
things become flat and again, swampy, mucky, or it just doesn't make sense. I mean, if you use critical thinking and logic on astrology, it doesn't make sense. It's not in that realm.
Right, because it's a way of thinking 4 or more dimensionally, not just with 3-dimensional science.
Exactly. This is about the dimensions beyond the 5 senses, beyond the 3rd dimension, going into the 4th, 5th, 6th dimensions, and the subtle body. And again, electricity. Nobody would have invented electricity without an open mind. And it's like Aquarius again is that opening of the mind, that there's more than what we can detect with the 5 senses. And obviously you don't reject the 5 senses, you just move beyond it. You allow the muse to come and bring innovation and also bring a spiritual awareness, and that's also the Uranus, is like allowing your mind to connect to the spiritual, not just the devotion of Pisces, not just
Right.
the structure of Capricorn. And it's like when the Aquarius connects to the spirituality, you can actually communicate with the sentience of the universe, the gods, the goddesses, the archetypes, the angels, the ancestors, the allies. Like you can, it's like the electricity that goes from a wire into the outlet to turn the lamp on. You also can, there's that electricity between you and these other beings and these other dimensional life forms and energies that we can connect with, which is very, I mean, it's almost like all of the occult arts are Aquarian in nature because they're channeled. And as we both, I mean, Matt and I both channel, and it's a natural human gift of Aquarius to channel, where we become the translators of these other realms and dimensions.
Right. And, when I was in the academy, one of the things I was in an interdisciplinary program, and one of the fields that I was heavily interested in was the history of science, or the philosophy of science. And one of the things I loved about it was that when you actually don't just take science as a given, but you take it as a process, you realize that a lot of the things that we know about the universe come to us through this engagement of the intuition, and these humans coming to this scientific method, and allowing the mind to be flexible enough to shift and change. Otherwise, we wouldn't know about things like oxygen or electricity.
Yeah, the science is Uranianly inspired as well. And so whether the higher mind and the other dimensions are coming through in service to science, or in service to spirituality, or the evolution of these other realms of the psyche in these other realms, both are Uranian, and both require the Saturnian discipline. The
Yeah.
scientific method being the Saturnian discipline for science. And I know for myself, and I mean, I kind of feel very firm, Saturnian firm about this, that to channel and to connect and contact these other dimensions, you've got to have a really good discipline of like clearing your energy and learning who you're communicating with. I mean, it's just as much a method there that opens you to channel correctly. I know
Right.
in my past, I have been fooled, and that my own energy affects how I'm channeling or connecting. And that's spiritually, but also the same with the muse creatively,
Right.
that depending on your energy, depending on your disciplines, it's going to affect what comes out creatively. But that whatever is coming through the Uranus is science, is poetry, is fiction, is spiritual knowledge. It's all of the higher mind stuff, or I don't want to say higher and lower, but all of the inventive, creative, spiritual mind stuff.
Yeah. Well, it requires you have to have a disciplined practice of the mind as much as you do of the spirit, like we were talking about with the Neptune alignment.
Yeah.
That you have to come to this, otherwise you're going to wind up just being tossed around by your ego, and by as uh, the Jungians might say, your complexes that you've inherited from your parents and your ancestors and whatnot. You'll
Yeah.
get kind of run around in a game of chasing your own tail a little bit. So you need a practice that disciplines the mind, so that you can back off of your fixed
Over
ideas.
identifying,
Hmm.
because that's what the ego does. It over identifies with the information, like getting all feeling super important because you're channeling the Pleiadians, or yeah, whatever, all that stuff. I don't want to invest too much there. I feel like this is a good segue to look at the shadow of Aquarius, though, because we're
Right.
dipping into the dangers, and that the shadow of Aquarius, is when the ego is pushing stuff away or whatever. I definitely feel the Aquarian Mercury retrograde right now, because I feel like
Yeah.
I just want to call things stuff. I just want to and stuff. I don't want to detail it out. I feel very mentally lazy.
Yeah, and since Mercury just went retrograde the other day in Aquarius, it's
Yeah.
probably a good kind of segue to talk about what happens when the planets get as close as they can to Earth. And that's what's happening right now. Mercury's as close as it gets to Earth in its orbit. And so it looks like Mercury, if we're looking at it against the backdrop of the stars, it looks like Mercury's stopped and going backwards. And so we get this kind of distortion of our own experience where we're kind of things just stop working a little bit. Our the Geminian kind of mind, the lower mind, it's hard to like trust that the concepts that we're using are right or wrong, because they seem to slip into paradox a lot. Or this is where we get like people blaming technology during Mercury retrograde, that
I
things
feel like
don't seem to
everything you're
work like they do.
saying right now is doing what you're saying. I'm listening to you and I'm like, what are you saying? I feel like what you just shared is so intellectually complex that I don't even know what you're talking about, which to me is exactly what you're talking about.
Right.
It's like meta. It's like you're sitting here talking about this concept, the way concepts can get all wonky, and you can lose your way within these concepts. And as you're sharing that, I'm getting totally lost in the concept of the retrograde, what a retrograde is, even though I know what a retrograde is, which is what the retrograde is when it's in Aquarius, because it can take something that you're so familiar with, like a retrograde, and make it be
Mhm.
like, what's a retrograde? What's happening? Like these things that you seem so clear on in your mind suddenly seem very muddled.
Yeah, well, it's like when you're well in the car, if you're driving a car, and the distortion of the mirror when you're looking in your rear view mirror. I mean, they put those warnings on the mirrors because uh, people can misjudge how far things are away from them and how fast things are moving. And I feel like that's kind of what's happening in Mercury retrograde. We get and other retrogrades where we get our relationship to things are get distorted by how close we are to them.
Yeah, and
So
and just as you're sharing that, it's like the distortion of a retrograde in Aquarius, because of being so caught up in your own individual perception. That's what's coming through for me. And I even
mhm,
feel it right now with us. Like I can feel you being in your personal distortion, because retrograde's going inward.
right,
And Aquarius is the mind. So if we, and it's that higher intermediary mind. So if it's going inward, it's kind of like, feels like everyone's going into their own crazy bubble, their own mental crazy.
mhm.
And then and that is all of the distortion that's created from that. Even though, and I just want to let that out and say, even though we're supposed to use the retrogrades to reflect, restore, reevaluate, like, oh, let me look back and think how my mind fucked with me or helped me or was in service to others or was self-centered. It's like a time to reflect upon your own mind and see, and just take a look there. I And that would be what we always say, like the rattle off what a retrograde is, and yet what it feels like in this moment is a bunch of distortion
Yeah,
from everyone going into their own mental bubbles.
right. Yeah, it's like I'm always questioning, my own memory a lot of the time during the retrograde periods. Like I remembered things differently, or I swore I did, check
And
that box. And
that's a great thing to bring up because, it's, like memory is subjective. 100% for all of our brains. I mean, this is what's so crazy is that all of our brains are subjective. This is why science tries so rigidly to have its scientific method to make it as objective as possible,
right.
which it can only do so much of because we can't escape the very nature of our brains being subjective, of memory being subjective. It's like crazy to think that way. And I trip on this sometimes, how it's kind of, and this touches on the shadow of Aquarius, the loneliness, the shadow, that because we can't really share our
Right.
our thought, but our minds, they're so, each one is its own fingerprint kaleidoscope of karma and feelings and constantly moving and changing and remembering totally different. And we can't give that to anybody else. It's all our own. And of course Pisces will come in to be like, let go of the mind, and we find that connection and oneness in more of our heart or more of our soul level. But just when you think about the mind, it's like we have lonely minds, very lonely minds.
Yeah, well, it's that process we were talking about before about Aquarius and that transformation that has to happen, and to get from one person to another and to be able to communicate takes a lot more than we really think it does. We take it for granted that we think we're talking and that is what the other person is hearing, but there's more going
Who knows
on.
what they're hearing?
Yeah.
Yeah, who knows what they're hearing? That's the insanity of it. And I just I feel like taking this moment just to recognize that, to recognize the insanity, the loneliness, the ridiculousness, the absurdity. Like there's such an element of absurdity
Yeah.
in the Aquarius energy, in recognizing that we're all each in our own little absurd universe in our minds, and that's never going anywhere. So then when you see everyone, screaming at each other to like see it my way, or in a family system when siblings fight, or in a relationship when there's just a constant,
Or on
like,
those Aquarian Facebook comment sections or
oh
message
yeah,
boards.
it's like bludgeoning. There's just a lot of, I mean, again, this goes into more psychology of the nervous system and blah, 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 blah. But like, in a way, Aquarius kind of is the nervous system, like in a way.
Well,
Is it?
well, I mean,
Could it
I
be?
think it's part of like air, and Mercury kind of represents a lot of that. So there's a little bit wrapped up in that with Aquarius, but it's more about how the connections that the nervous system makes. Like I
Right.
think
Yeah,
Aquarius represents that.
that feels right to me. Yeah.
Yeah,
The connect.
connecting the brain and the heart, connecting the
Right.
mental and the emotional.
Connecting worlds.
hmm And
And
it requires coming to it and being flexible.
yeah, well, that's a great next thing, because I was just thinking about, when Uranus gets harsh. I know whenever I'm reading a Uranus transit for a client, it comes with a warning. It's like, if you don't stay mentally flexible, you will break your toe, you will have the car accident, you will wind up laid up on the couch. When your mind is rigid, Uranus will put you up so
Right.
that you are forced to think differently. So, but if you stay flexible, you don't need to have the thing that puts you up on the couch. You don't need the thing that's going to take you out of your routine to force you to think differently, make you face your vulnerability.
Right. Or you can, you were finding comfort in one place or one thing, and you don't have access to that anymore, but you can find comfort in something else. That's one of the things about Aquarius, what Aquarius can lend to Taurus energy, is that Aquarius is like adapt, change.
It's
You'll
totally
find
like
comfort
adapt.
somewhere else too. Yeah.
Yeah. It's totally, and Uranus being in the sign of Taurus till 2026 right now, bringing that Aquarian energy to Taurus, which is just so crazy to bring the Uranian conductor of transmutation to the like bull that's like, please don't change me ever.
Right.
Is so intense.
Yeah, and we've got Saturn up there squaring Uranus for the entire year.
Yeah.
That's the major, I mean, if you talk to any astrologers, that's the major signature
That's
of
the thing.
2021. It's less of a mess than 2020 when we had Pluto in the mix, but it's not going to be comfortable, that's for sure.
Well, and again, it's really speaking to the discomfort of the mind, right? That square, the Saturn Aquarius, it's like, and it's Aquarius ruled by Saturn, squaring Uranus. So it's like the Uranus and the Saturn of Aquarius, both chafing, the squares are the chafe, forcing you into new action. So it's like you have to discipline your mind in order to adapt to the new change wherever it is in your chart. Like, again, I'm thinking about in my chart, the Saturn Aquarius is first house. So I've got to discipline my body and my identity in my mind.
Right.
In order for my perception, because Uranus and Taurus is in my third house of perception, in order for my perception to go through a major shift, which it already has. It's gone from like, I can't multitask to I can totally multitask. But yeah, I was able to do that when Uranus gave me that crisis not too long ago, which it does. I, in my mind, stopped telling the story of, I can't do this. I can't juggle all of this, right? First house, Saturn Aquarius, look at your limiting narrative in the first house on the self. And I could see it. I was saying, I can't do this. I can't multitask. It's too much. I was like, get rid of that. Yes, you can. You can. I can do this. I can multitask. I am adaptable. I can change. And bam. And then I did. That's that square. And then all of a sudden, there I was multitasking, and the change, the innovation occurred. So yeah, you want to look in your chart and see where you need to make a narrative change, a mental narrative change where Saturn Aquarius is, in order to go through the innovation of your being, of your body, of your place in life, where that Uranus Taurus is.
Yeah, exactly. Like for me, it's my 11th house is Aquarius. And so Saturn being there, I'm having to discipline how I network, how I engage with groups, maybe letting go of some limiting beliefs about how groups operate and how people do things, the mores that people have, what is acceptable. And I'm having to work out a digital marketing strategy, for someone who's been predominantly anti-capitalist for a long time. It's really chafing.
That right there is a perfect example of 11th house. You have to change your narrative that is just 100% anti-capitalist. It's like you have to change. That's 11th house, because 11th house would be where those beliefs and goals and aspirations are. And you have to actually change that belief.
Right.
In order to innovate your second house, where you're
my second house. Yeah. Money. Because I need money.
Yeah, you need resources. And so you have to change your narrative around capitalism. And Aquarius says you can change these rigid beliefs without throwing the baby out with the bathwater.
Right.
You don't have to become a greedy person to work within capitalism. Aquarius is trying to say none of these things are rigid. They're all flexible. It's how we use them. Like the force, you can use it for good and bad. You can use money for good or bad. You can use capitalism for good or bad. You can, any ism, any resource. It's not the ism or the resource. It's the human heart.
Yeah.
That makes it bad or good.
Yeah. It's that property of air that it's an essence. It evades our normal perception, but you can move from the water in the stream to the water in the cup to the water in the body, and it's still water, even though it changes a lot of how it operates, and
Yeah,
what
I
it looks
love how
like.
you say that. The water from the stream, which is like the oneness, to the
Hmm.
water in the cup, which is like the heart, to the water in the body is how you're nourishing yourself with the, it's like the water is love, right? And love
Hmm.
is not froofy, right? Love is the binding, the atoms. Like love is like the consciousness. Love is consciousness. They're synonymous. Love
Right.
and consciousness are synonymous. That's the water.
Hmm. Yeah, because you get, in the natural world too, you get water in the stream, or the water we think of as water, the fluid. You get it hot, it evaporates, it turns into uh, vapor, which is a very uh, different, sensible thing, but it's the same thing, because then it can then condense and get harder and become more solid, and then it becomes the raindrops and it becomes the water again. Like there's a whole cycle and process that's happening, and that's what we need to like open ourselves up to, is this, that things have to and need to change, and that
Things
change
have to and need to change.
that's
And
where
I just want
dynamic life comes from.
I want to link that with the other sentence too. Things have to change. The water from the river goes to the water of the cup, goes to the water of the body. The water that's in the lake evaporates into the sky, fills the clouds, rains back down. Everything has to keep adapting and changing. It's all a process, it's all a verb. And consciousness is what is always changing. And it right
Mhm.
now it's taking the form of me and you here,
Mhm.
like, but behind all of it, behind all of our forms is consciousness. It's all the water.
Mhm.
Water is everything. And
Right.
Aquarius is, yeah, it's so cool. Like I'm just feeling the beauty of like how Aquarius is the process of the water becoming one thing after the next, and how the beauty of Uranus is the suppleness around that, the allowing of that, and that it's only our rigid egos. Because I mean, humans are like, yeah, we know how to dig in and just, we're built to be like that. And then Uranus will come in and create more of the crises and the to like, wake up, humans,
Mhm.
wake up out of your slumber. You have to open and change.
Right. We like to want to be in control of everything.
Yeah,
Uh, and, when we try to do that, then we run into this problem of that we're in the middle of all of it. So how can we control it? And that's the Uranus energy, is to shake up our perspective, so that
yeah,
we remember that we're in the middle of it, and there
right,
is, like, we need to, be transferring one thing to another. We have to hold up our end of things. I mean, if we think of, cells in the body, when they don't do that, we wind up with cancer.
right.
uh
Yeah,
so
swampy bodies create cancer.
Yeah, so we
It's,
have to be the cells to the next property up, we have
yeah,
to be kind of
in the
flowing and
larger
letting
body.
life and consciousness move through us too. We're not the end of consciousness, and I think that's an important thing to keep in mind. That discipline of the mind, like we were talking
Yeah,
about with
the
Saturn,
the
is that
Saturn,
I'm not the be all end all of everything. I'm
totally.
important. I'm an important part. I'm not just a cog in the
It's
machine.
all important parts. And yeah, you're metaing out, which is like really seeing that human beings are part of the larger process of the earth, part of the larger process of the galaxy, part of the larger process of the universe, part of the larger process of the multiverse. Like, and every single component, every single part is absolutely necessary, valuable, beautiful, important, with its own story. I mean, the humans are like the poets. Like, we have to turn things into meaning. That's what we do. We are the meaning
Right.
makers, and so when the ego gets all calcified in the
Hmm.
swamp of control because of the systemic abuse that has shut off this natural water supply,
Yeah.
essentially, then we all become a bunch of a-holes and victims. Like, this is what will happen when systemic abuse calcifies the ego and turns, and we become rigid because our nervous systems are not part of the larger process. It's like we're cauterized from the symbiosis of the process in our minds.
Right. And
in our minds, not for real, but in our minds.
Yeah. And that seems to me, you know, the metaphor of where that Christian concept of hell like resonates, that it's, you know, being cut off from the consciousness or the God or whatever you want to think, however you want to think about it.
It's the mind that is cut off.
It's not some other place that we're going to go to if we are bad people, but it's that when you cut yourself off from the flow of life, that these things get harsh, and you know that you get those metaphors of weeping and gnashing of teeth within inside, you know, all the groping for needing.
And very important point, that when you cut yourself off, it's always in the mind. We're not really cut off. We're totally symbiotic part of it all. It's the mind that cuts it off. It's the mind. The mind is so freaking powerful. It's so powerful.
And that's why some of the harshest cards in the tarot tend to be the swords, which are mental cards.
Yeah, because that's what creates the suffering. That's what makes us tell ourselves we are what we are not. And that's, I think, I'm just thinking when you're mentioning Christian hell, I'm thinking of Sartre saying hell is other people. And his play No Exit. And it's like the same thing. It's like, you know, it's this, like, hell is a mindset. It's the mindset of either sin and self-hatred and abuse, or it's the mindset of like the calcified ego that can only see its own way. And so when it's in a room with other people, it's like the worst feeling ever. Like, it's just like so beautiful too, how when you look at plays and religious stories and myths, how you can see what we've done, what we're capable of in our minds in the shadow, how that gets expressed as hell. Or Dante, and thinking of Dante's, how many layers? Like 9 layers of hell.
7 layers of hell. Yeah, I mean, I'm working through a whole poem cycle right now that plays on the Divine Comedy, plays with it, and thinking through the contemporary moment as being like a similar moment to what Dante was going through with, you know, he was also kind of coming into writing this in the middle of, you know, a heavy emphasis on air as well, and the crumbling institutions and things like that.
That's really cool. And that's just like, it's bringing me back to the retrograde Mercury, Aquarius retrograde again, of like reflecting on how your calcified ego pretty much cauterizes you from the flow of life, of your own ability to adapt and change, of your own ability to hold what you feel to be true, but still connect with others when they are at a different spot in life or feel or believe different, even threatening people. You know, like, it's again in the mind, like, because our mind, this is a weird thought, but I guess it's Uranus giving me this thought, that because our minds are all our own, truly, like, as humans, we're in this kaleidoscope where everyone's mind is their own. Nobody can take your mind. They can take your body, they can take your physical life, but they can't take your mind, you know, because there's always that, like, you can't take my soul, you can't take that either. But you also can't take the mind.
Right.
Everyone's mind is always free, or the possibility.
It should be free.
It is free, but when it's not free, it's because you're being deluded or brainwashed in some way.
Or you're that 8 of Swords, the woman with the blindfold who's surrounded by swords and thinks you're trapped.
Torn, which is this is what the retrograde's great for, because when in the 8 of Swords, when you're blindfolded and you feel trapped, it's because you're like, is that belief true? What they believe is how I was raised true? Or is this small voice inside of me true? Well, I can't actually believe the small voice inside of me is true because out here isn't validating it. And it's really scary to just go with my own internal sense. And yet that's what Aquarius is inviting us to do. It's inviting us to listen in on the thoughts that we're catching in our brains that are coming from the channel that we naturally connect with, those beings, those higher beings, our own soul, like the way that we connect to the larger whole individually. And when we listen to that individual channel, that's what Aquarius wants us to do, but that's what's so hard, because we want to be validated by other people. And it's almost like there's a whole psychological underpinning explanation for this. I don't want to reduce with one statement, but still want to say the one statement of like, there's this addiction we have to needing validation from other people. Like that's part of the ego. That it's the way the ego operates, the pack mentality, where we need this validation from those around us. And yet Aquarius is telling us to do things in reverse. It's telling us to find our own validation with the larger transpersonal channels or higher self we connect with, and then offer that to others. And that's the collective part to Aquarius, is like what we offer to others, not what the validation we're trying to get from others. Like, what can we offer?
Yeah, I mean, I know one of the arguments that I used to have with my therapist a lot was about, how can I love myself if other people won't love me? And then it's the realizing that, oh, well, I have to, how can other people love the self if I don't love the self? And so then you have to come up with a way to honor that inner child, the inner voice, and then you can bring that to other people. And it isn't seeking validation or needing other people to do the loving before you can do it. You learn to do it yourself, and then other people can choose to love you or not. And it's a much more rewarding process than seeking it from other people that may or may not do that, because maybe they're going through their same issue.
We come from that because of pack mentality, because of like the animal part of us. And yet Aquarius is evolution, innovate, evolve. Okay, you come from that, from caveman days, Neanderthal days, but innovate it. You do have the strength. You are capable. You can adapt. You can pull away from, I always think of it of like suckling off the teat. That's always my go-to with everything. It's like, I need my mommy's milk. I need my validation from others. I need my beer. I need my sugar. I need my chocolate. We're always trying to get that hit of mommy's love that we never got growing up. And there's this dependency on the external hits from people and chocolate and alcohol and drugs and shopping and weight loss and beauty products and on and on and on and on. And Aquarius is like, get off the teat. 5% more, just 5% more. Sometimes it's more. And that you can start to go within and listen to your true voice, your inner child, your angels, ancestors, and allies, and start to cultivate more of a dependence, a symbiotic interdependence with the inner world, the inner self, and the inner beings. And that, if we do that, we can offer that. So there's our bell, and we're going to use Saturnian discipline and stop right at the
That's right. Mental discipline. We don't want to overwhelm anybody. I mean, I feel like an hour is long enough to captivate people to listen to words without a physical space to take it in.
So now that we've blabbed your ears off with our spew, just a reminder that if you want your astrology read, reach out to Matt at intransitastrology.com. He has packages too, which are really cool.
Yeah, because you get to work for more than one session. Because often a session, you come up with so much stuff and you have tons of questions. So the packages are able. I'm trying to make it as affordable as possible for people to get breaks in between, so that you can reflect, just like we were talking about with the retrogrades. Reflect, and then come back and have get your questions clarified, or your approach clarified, and really work through things a little bit better.
A little bit deeper and a little bit more meaningful with the packages.
Right.
And if you are interested in astrological, tarot, spiritual, transpersonal, depth therapy work to work
check out
through
Michelle.
And this is to work through anything that might be wrong, but also if you support in your in the evolution of your true self. I like to consider myself a true self doula, and a doula for death as well. But anyway, I don't want to start talking for another 10 minutes, but you can reach out to me or Matt, and we'll see you at the next Priestess
Mercury's
Mercury.
hour. Yeah.